Amy Hsiao is a long-term educator of Simcoe County District School Board. She has taught all grades from kindergarten to grade 8. In recent years, she has been SCUSB's multilingual language facilitator, supporting students in ESL. This year, her role has also taken on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion portfolio, where she supports educators and students with their DEI plans.
Thanks.
So, Amy, introduce yourself and what you do at Banting.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Kelly. My name's Amy Hsiao. I am a Diversity, Equity, Inclusion / Multilingual Language Facilitator this year. I work at Simcoe County as a central staff member and support a variety of schools, Tier 1 schools, where I travel. I'm basically a traveling teacher, so I travel to many different schools and mainly supporting with schools school action equity plans and to help them kind of plan out their goals for the year.
Okay. So what resources do you provide for students?
For students, mainly I work directly with educator teams, so education teams, that includes MIN educators, basically the entire school plan team, and we plan programming, we plan student clubs, we plan activities, student forums, those types of things. So whatever these education teams want to do to support students, that's where I come in. I come in to help them plan, I help them design lessons. I sometimes model lessons to teachers so that they can then take those lessons and showcase it to students. And yeah, planning slide decks and slideshows so that educators can take that back to their students. So I indirectly support students. I also support students in a one-on-one direct way in that I do wellness check-ins on students, make sure that their ESL programming is followed and monitored, I guess. So those are some other ways that I directly support students.
Nice. And how can our students meet you, and what kind of support can you offer?
Typically, I have a weekly schedule of the schools that I'm going to be at. The students that I already are on my roster, students that I check in on, they know that I come on a certain day. So for example, Banting, I come on Fridays, and I check in on many of my students that I've already been supporting. I usually check in on the education teams that I work with, check in that the activities that we had planned are still going smoothly, and whatever I can help to take on and to support with, I take on activities or lessons or projects that I can take on to take off a teacher's load, because it's a lot to take on sometimes, in addition to the courses that teachers have to teach. All of these extra clubs are all extra, right? Mm-hmm. So as a central staff member, a big part of my role, I think, is to support educators, and some of that sometimes is taking some of the pressure off of them. As far as students go, I do have check-in days. I usually just surprise visits are the other way. When I know their schedules, so I pop in on their classes and just check in on them. Wellness walks and talks happen throughout school buildings. You might see me walking through your hallways, just chatting with a student. I also do advocacy for students. Mm-hmm. So when talking to my students and I find out there's a need that they have or something that they're feeling like they don't have anyone to speak to about, I try to advocate on their behalf, either to their guidance counselors, to their teachers, or even sometimes to their admin.
Mm. Very nice. And what influenced you to become a diversity, equity, and inclusion coach?
I think mainly because I myself never saw this kind of support growing up in school. I didn't really see my identity as a piece that needed to be supported, I think, when I was growing up, or didn't know that I needed support. But there was no representation back then, right? So much of my story and much of my identity, much of my history was kind of erased out of the curriculum, never brought into the classroom, never talked about, which makes me feel like maybe it wasn't important. Maybe it's not part of the education system. I went to school, and in school I had done quite a few courses on diversity, equity, inclusion, done some studying on East Asian studies, women's studies, and in that, and in university was where I think I first started to discover my own identity, that it mattered, and that it can have a contribution to a space. Then I started teaching, and in my teaching, I think I was looking at the student diversity in my classrooms, and albeit in Simcoe County, that diversity has changed immensely, because 20 years ago, Simcoe County didn't quite look the way it looks today, right? And 20 years ago, being one of few marginalized minority educators in the school board, I still wasn't too sure if I can start introducing this work into my classroom. But as my classroom started to change, I started to make sure that my educational practices started to change. I wanted to make sure that my students didn't have those same feelings I had going to school. And so over a 20-year career so far, I've learned that by listening to, I guess, my students and my families.
Nice. And what methods do you use to evaluate and analyze student problems?
When it comes to the DEI portion of my job, we look at a school's school action equity plan, so the SAEP. So every school has to have one, and it's created in conjunction with the admin and the educators, and typically those teams will invite us in to kind of help create those plans. Those plans are something that the school team works on throughout the year. It's meant to be a working document that's worked on throughout the year. We use that to evaluate what are our goals this year with regards to equity in our school. What are our hopes and plans as far as clubs and newsletters and events that we hold in our school that focus on equity. So that's one tool that we use to kind of like look at the goals, plan out our goals, and then decide as a school team how we're going to make that actionable, right? How we're going to follow through on that. As far as the MLL portion of my role, the tool that we use to measure student progress or student success, I guess, would be the STEP tool. So it's the Steps to English Language Proficiency, and that's a resource. It's a multi-use tool, actually. Originally, it was first created, and many people use it just as a diagnostic assessment to see how much English a student has. But now it's become a tool where, as an educator, I can use it to plan, to program, to assess, and to report with as far as a multilingual student's language proficiency. So that's another tool that we use in schools.
Okay. How do you help students who are struggling with being included?
Listen to students, I think, is number one, because you don't know that they're struggling until you actually listen to students. Without their voice, without knowing what it is, that's the root cause of what's causing them to struggle, it's hard to support, right? So often, I always say when I travel into a school is that we need to listen to students. Like, that's first and foremost. Student voice is very critical. When I was a classroom teacher, it was a little easier because my students are right in front of me. Now in this role, where I'm traveling teacher, a big part of it is trying to make relationships with students. It's harder when you're traveling because you're not in a building long enough to get to know kids well enough. When it was my own class, I had them every day, right? They're in front of me every day. I get to know them. I really get to know the student and their families. In this traveling role, I'm really dependent on teachers, right? On teachers to make those relationships and for them to bring back whatever information they get. Also, we have student panels, we have student forums. I know here at Banting, you're really inviting student voice into a lot of the conversations, and so I think that's the first starting point. In order to better understand how to support students, we have to listen to students.
I love that. I agree.
Thanks.
And what does DI mean to you, and why is it important?
Yeah, I think it goes back to my beginnings, right? DEI when I was younger was not even talked about, so it was nowhere on my radar that I even needed to understand this. And I think because we didn't talk about DEI, because we didn't talk about my identity, because my identity was not anywhere in the textbooks, anywhere in the storybooks, anywhere in the conversation, it made me truly believe that I don't think my identity really matters in school. So I took on the dominant ideologies. I took on the dominant way of thinking. I took on basically dominant culture, and I accepted that as my own. And some of that was kind of like I was acting, right? I was acting to make myself fit that dominant culture when it wasn't really mine, but it was all that was available. So I took it on, and I think that was pretty much of my primary education, right into secondary, right into first, second year college, university. It wasn't until second, third year university where I started to have more choice and advocacy, where I could start to have more choice in the courses that I took and the things I wanted to learn about. And then I was joining clubs and different diverse groups where I'm hearing different perspectives, and I'm hearing other East Asian classmates, educators that were sharing their stories. And then I realized, wait a minute, my story is not isolated. It's not my own. There's actually a large group of us that feel this way too, and experienced education the same way I experienced it. So it was just through learning. Like, I wasn't born with this, right? I wasn't born with this knowledge and information or this kind of passion to like want to make sure that this education gets pushed forward. I learned it with time. I think at your age, I think students your age these days are exposed to it a lot sooner and earlier. And I think that shows progress, that we're having this conversation right now, right? That maybe in your elementary schooling, maybe you saw a storybook where you felt like you were represented in that story. Maybe, hopefully, right?
Yes,
That's my hope, right? That you saw yourself represented in a storybook, because I never did until university. So that's many, many years later, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's why. That's why I think DEI is so important. I think representation matters. It means everything to our young people. So I do it for the part of me that I felt like got overlooked. I do it for my students, and I do it for my own children.
On the same topic, how would you describe our school in terms of DEI?
I think Banting is making leaps and bounds. You are one of the few schools where I'm constantly being invited in. I've sat in on your Coming of the Minds, a meeting of the minds, I think we called it, a session where we invited student advocates. They treated us to a wonderful afternoon off-site, and I got to, for the first time, meet some of your student advocates in your building in a much more intimate setting. It was great to listen. Students here at Banting are so courageous. They are such strong leaders. They were sharing things and telling us things that I never in my wildest imagination would have been able to talk about, I think, in high school. When I was your age, like I don't think I would have had the confidence that students today have to be able to share their own personal experiences, what they feel is missing, what they are wanting to see more of. They were asking for it in a way that had so much power, and I've never experienced that myself. So that part was surprising to me. I got to take part in a student forum here, which is also something I feel was unique to Banting. And that forum, that conversation is going to continue. Like, it's not just ending with, oh, let's get all the students together, have this talk, and we're done, bye guys. It is totally something I see that is going to be moving forward. Your education team, your admin team here, and all the supporting teams, and your student advocacy groups. Like, this is one of the few places that I know already has existing GSAs, BSAs, ISAs, SASAs, which, like, did you know that even existed
No.
here? Yeah, you have a South Asian Student Association that just started. And that's exciting to me, because those are all groups that were once marginalized, that once never had their voices heard, that never had groups or never had the regular classroom culture mention anything about their lived experiences, and now they have clubs devoted to them. So I do know that here at Banting, you are trying to move forward with a learning journey that I can see happening. And listening to student voice, I think, is always the first place it needs to start, and it's happening here. I see it.
And what would you hope to see our learning community to be in the future?
I hope that it just keeps continuing, right? Too much of the time, DEI work is seen as like a check off the box type of practice. Like, oh, we had a problem here, we're gonna invite in some guest speakers, and now we're done. We've solved whatever the problem of oppression was. We've solved, and I guarantee you that different forms of oppression are not going to be solved, probably not in my lifetime. I'm hoping in your lifetime, but probably not in mine. And it means that all of us now just need to keep working, right? These seem like big, huge problems. Racism seems like a giant, enormous problem. Homophobia seems like a gargantuan problem. Anti-Semitism, big problems, right? These are things that have been around forever. And sometimes it seems daunting that, like, what can me, one lonely person, do by myself to change these kinds of oppressive behaviors that have been around throughout history? And we're talking hundreds of years, right? And it sometimes feels daunting, feels like we can't solve these problems. But I guarantee you, we are seeing with every act, every action, with every bit of advocacy that we do, every student forum that I attend, I see changes. Like, there's a reason why you got to see a story in your earlier childhood shared at school that shows representation, that shows your identity, that shows pieces of you matter in school. To be able to sit down today with you and talk, right, is another piece of like, oh, this is actually important. This means something, that we're going to take time to have a conversation about it, to take time to write about it, to take time to keep learning about it. I think that's what I'm hoping will continue to happen here at Banting. And based on what I'm seeing, based on the student population here and your great equity education team here, I have no doubt that that will continue on. And I'm hoping it'll continue on into your broader community, like the broader community of Alliston and surrounding areas. And I know you're going off to school, right? Like the hopes is to go off to school next year. And I'm hoping that you'll take the learning that you learned here at Banting with you when you go off to university. And that maybe there you're going to find other teams and groups that will further your learning. And that's the whole point. The whole point is that diversity, equity, inclusion learning is meant to inspire all of us to keep the learning going forward. And that's my hope. Thanks for that question.
That's all.